hey, hey, oh, hey, hey. I'm blessing every one of you today in the good spiritual words. So remember, in your heart, open up your heart for everybody here today, because we need your help. We need your help and the support today, and keep it up in the good work. I really thank you very much for being here today.
Coming out here as we begin the final stages of the historic battle to protect the Arctic Wildlife Refuge. Everything is on the line in these final weeks of this Congress.
In the history of our country, you did everything except move to Ohio.
Listen to the drumbeat of our Alaskan natives, because theirs is the music of the heart of the world. It is also a tocsin which sounds for America to live up to its promise of environmental justice, to its promise of liberty for all, of fairness for our native brothers and sisters. It is a drumbeat which we must march to as we move forward, not only to reclaim the Alaska National Wildlife Reserve, but also to reclaim our environment from those who would destroy it with their predatory economic behavior.
Articulate critique of current environmental policies. Please join me in welcoming Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
The oil industry and its trade associations and its phony think tanks and its prostitutes and its indentured servants up here in the United States Capitol would like to convince the American public that the most imaginative energy policy that we can have as a nation is to drill in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. They know it's a lie. If we, according to the USGS, if we get 100% of the oil out of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, it's 0.2% of global reserves. According to President Bush's own energy department, if we get oil, all of that oil out, it will reduce the price of oil to Americans at the pump, of gasoline at the pump, by 1 cent a gallon 20 years from now. That is not a national energy policy. We have, if we drill every national park, every shoreline in this country, every bit of real estate in America, we can get less than 3% of global reserves. We use 25%. There is no way, do the math, that we are ever going to drill our way out of oil dependence. Our problem is not foreign oil dependence, it is oil dependence.
Okay.
We use 25% of global reserves. The biggest leverage that we have is through conservation. And by doing a couple of reasonable, common sense things that Savannah pointed out, we can exploit that in ways that would make the Arctic trivial. If we raise fuel economy standards in this country by 1 mile per gallon, we yield more gasoline than is in 2 Arctic National Wildlife Refuges. If we raise fuel economy by 2.6 miles per gallon, we get more oil than we're now getting from Iraq and Kuwait combined. If we raise fuel economy by 7.6 miles per gallon, we can eliminate 100% of Gulf oil imports into this country. That's a national energy policy. That's a policy that will reduce our vulnerability to price shocks on the international oil market. It will minimize the chances of entangling ourselves with Mideastern dictators and humiliating and costly wars, people that we should not, that are hate democracy, that are despised by their own people, and that we should have nothing to do with. It will improve our balance of payments, and it will make every American richer, because if we're all driving Priuses and get 40 miles per gallon, we'll each have $400 or $500 in our pockets at the end of the year. And he had to gut the Social Security Trust Fund in order to do it. Well, what would it be? Well, how would it stimulate our economy if we were all getting $300 or $400 or $500 or $600 every year, year after year, every American with a car, because we had good fuel economy standards? That is a real national economic policy. And you know, we're not protecting the refuge for the sake of the fishes and the birds. We're protecting it for our own sake, because we recognize that wilderness is part of our heritage in this country, and it is how we define ourselves as a people. And you know, if you look from the beginning of our national history, our greatest political leaders and moral leaders and spiritual leaders were telling the American people, you don't have to be ashamed because you don't have the 1,500 years of culture that they have in Europe, because you have this relationship to the land, and particularly with wilderness, which is the undiluted work of the Creator. And that's going to be the source of your values and virtues and character as a people. Turner, our greatest American historian, said that in America, democracy came out of the forest. Our cultural institutions, the political institutions that we treasure, that we value in this country, are here with us because of wilderness. And yet this administration looks out on the last place in America that still looks like America looked the day that Columbus landed, where you have nomadic people following these great migratory herds of mammals. That's the only place you can see it. And the administration looks at those green landscapes and they see cash for their corporate contributors, and that's all. They don't understand. They don't understand that this is where our values come from. And I'm so glad that Rabbi Saperstein was up here to open this convocation a minute ago by reminding us that we preserve nature, because particularly wilderness, because this is where we sense the divine. This is where God speaks to us most closely, with greatest clarity and texture and grace and joy through His creation. And you know, if you look at every religious tradition, these are people up here who claim to represent religious values, but they have undermined and violated every one of the manifold mandates of the Christian faith, of the Jewish faith, right on. Treat nature as stewards, and that we treat our future generations with responsibility. And if you look at every religious tradition throughout the history of mankind, the central epiphany always occurs in the wilderness. Buddha had to go to the wilderness to experience nirvana and self-realization. Muhammad had to go to the wilderness of Mount Hira at 629 to wrestle an angel and have the Quran squeezed from him. Moses had to go to the wilderness of Mount Sinai for 40 days to get the commandments. The Jews had to spend 40 years wandering the wilderness to purge themselves of the 400 years of slavery in Egypt. Christ had to go into the wilderness for 40 days to discover His divinity for the first time. His mentor was John the Baptist, a man who lived in the cave in the Jordan Valley and dressed in the skins of wild beasts and ate locusts and the honey of wild beasts. And all of Christ's parables are taken from nature. I am the vine, you are the branches, the mustard seed, the little swallows, the scattering the seeds. The reason He did that, and it's the same reason that all the Old Testament prophets, the Talmudic prophets, the Quranic prophets, all of them, every one of them came out of the wilderness, and every one of them were shepherds, and that daily connection to wild nature gave them a special access to the wisdom of the Almighty. And the reason they spoke in parables and allegories drawn from nature was that's how they stayed in touch with the people. They were saying things that were prophetic, that contradicted everything that the common people had heard from the literate, sophisticated people of their time, and they would have dismissed them as quacks. But they were able to confirm the wisdom of their parables through their own observations of the fishes and the birds. And they were able to say, he's not telling us something new. He's telling us something very, very old. Messages that were written into creation at the beginning of time by the Creator. And we haven't been able to discern or decipher them until the prophets came who had immersed themselves in wilderness, learned its language, and come back to our cities to tell us the wisdom of God. This is where our values come from. And this administration that claims to be an administration of values, the only value that they really consider worth fighting for is corporate profit-taking. Everything else is just a hollow facade that masks that one value. And they call themselves conservatives, but they have torn the conserve out of conservatism. And we need to fight to take our democracy back.
That's right, Robert. Please. For all of that. We're here drumming, singing, dancing, and praying because our elders and our people called upon us to do this, because they said the only way for us to reach the people out here is through our culture, through who we are, and connecting as human beings, one person by one person. And so we're doing that in the best way that we can, and we thank you for your support.